Let's jump right into this explainer. I want you to picture something for a second. Imagine you're standing in the middle of England over 400 years ago. The streets of 16th century London are just absolutely packed. I mean, you've got merchants, nobles, actors, musicians, all crammed together shoulder to shoulder. The whole city is just buzzing with this incredible electric energy. And the theaters, they are completely sold out, with people desperate to see these massive, grand stories of kings and murderers and fools. But right in the middle of all this chaotic, noisy bustling, there's a playwright. And he's quietly doing something that honestly sounds impossible. Today, we're going to explore exactly how William Shakespeare used just 154 poems as a literal literary weapon to, well, defeat time itself.
And we're going to start right here, with what is hands down the most famous opening line in the entire history of poetry. "Shall I compare thee to a summer's day?" It's one of those lines that's so deeply woven into our cultural DNA that you've probably heard it a million times, even if you haven't read a single poem since high school. But here's the thing. Behind this gorgeous romantic question, there is an unbelievable historical mystery, and the emotional stakes, they are incredibly high. See, these poems weren't just, pretty words on a page. They were a desperate, brilliant battle against mortality itself.
But to really understand the poetry, we first have to understand the guy holding the pen. Section 1, the mysterious playwright.
All right, let's look at this timeline. So William Shakespeare was definitely not born into royalty. He was born back in 1564 in a pretty small town called Stratford-upon-Avon. His dad was actually a successful glove maker, and young William, he probably just went to the local grammar school. Literally no one could have predicted that this provincial kid would become the world's most legendary writer. Fast forward to when he's 18 in 1582, and he marries Anne Hathaway. Fun fact here, she was 26 and already pregnant. But then, things get kinda weird. He just completely drops off the historical map for several years. Historians literally just call this the lost years. Was he working as a school teacher? Was he traveling around with a band of actors? Honestly, nobody has a clue. But when he finally pops back up in the historical records in the 1590s, he is this wildly successful actor and playwright in London. He's churning out these blockbuster tragedies and comedies that are totally mesmerizing everyone, from the common laborers standing down in the dirt, all the way up to the wealthy nobles sitting in the fancy balconies.
But, a playwright needs a stage. And in London, the stages definitely did not always stay open. Which brings us to Section 2, Anatomy of a Sonnet.
So, during this terrible outbreak of the plague, London essentially went into a massive 16th century lockdown. Sound familiar? The theaters were completely forced to shut their doors. So with absolutely nowhere to put on his plays, Shakespeare pivoted to the ultimate side hustle, poetry. Now, before he came along, sonnets usually followed this very traditional Italian style created by a poet named Petrarch. But Shakespeare being Shakespeare, he took that traditional format and completely overhauled it. He transformed it into this highly structured, precision-engineered machine that we now call the Shakespearean sonnet.
Let's actually break down the exact anatomy of this literary weapon. Every single one of these sonnets is exactly 14 lines long, no more, no less. And these 14 lines are divided into 3 quatrains, which is just a fancy way of saying 4-line stanzas. Then, that's followed by one final isolated 2-line conclusion, and that's called a couplet. This structure perfectly illustrates his absolute genius for storytelling. He uses those first 12 lines to really build up a problem or make an argument or swell up an emotion. And then, bam! That final 2-line couplet is specifically engineered to deliver this powerful conclusion, or even better, a massive, totally surprising twist.
Okay, now let's talk about the math behind the music. I want to mentally burn this famous rhyme scheme into your brain. ABAB, CD, EFEF, GG. Because this specific pattern gave his poems this driving rhythmic heartbeat. Those alternating rhymes literally pull you forward through the quatrains, faster and faster, until you hit that GG at the very end, that couplet, and it just locks the poem's final thought into place with this incredibly satisfying definitive punch.
Armed with this brilliant new structure, Shakespeare went straight to work. Let's move into Section 3, the Mystery Collection.
154. That is the sheer, staggering volume of sonnets that were published all together in a single collection in 1609. But here is where things get really wild. Even today, scholars are actively arguing over whether Shakespeare ever actually wanted the public to read these. Think about it.
Unlike his plays, which were literally designed to be shouted from a public stage, these 154 poems feel intensely, almost uncomfortably personal. I mean, they are diving deep into jealousy and guilt and regret and just raw, unfiltered desire. And that brings us to the biggest historical mystery of this whole explainer. Who was he writing to? The poems are addressed to these specific, really enigmatic characters. A bunch of them are written to this beautiful young man who scholars usually just call the fair youth. Others are addressed to this really mysterious woman with dark features, famously known as the Dark Lady. So were they real people in his actual life? Were they secret lovers? Or were they just entirely fictional characters that he made up for the sake of the art? Well, nobody actually knows. But the fact that these poems are so raw and so provocative is exactly why they've kept readers completely hooked for centuries.
But hey, while the subjects themselves might be a total mystery, the core theme of the collection is crystal clear. Welcome to Section 4, Love, Time, and Despair.
Over and over again across these 154 poems, this one recurring villain keeps showing up, and it's not some jealous king or a greedy murderer, it is time itself. Shakespeare viewed time as this relentless, invisible, totally destructive force. I mean, just look at time's resume. It destroys youth, it fades beauty, it literally crumbles massive stone buildings, and eventually it kills even the absolute most powerful kings on earth. Time is undefeated. But against all of this destruction, Shakespeare presents his chosen defense. He truly believed there was one single weapon out there powerful enough to resist time: art, specifically great poetry. Words, he argued, were the one thing that could actually preserve beauty forever.
And that brings us right back to Sonnet 18, arguably the most famous poem ever written. See, Shakespeare starts out by asking if he should compare his beloved to a summer's day. But then he immediately points out that, well, summer fades. The sun gets way too hot, flowers wilt, the clouds roll in, literally everything beautiful eventually grows old and dies. But then, in the triumphant climax, remember that final GG rhyming couplet we talked about earlier? He just drops his thesis. So long as men can breathe or eyes can see, so long lives this, and this gives life to thee. He is flat out guaranteeing immortality. He's saying, as long as human beings exist on this planet to read this exact poem, the person I'm writing about will never, ever truly die.
We see this incredible battle continue in another absolute masterpiece, Sonnet 29. I want to quickly guide you step by step through the emotional roller coaster of this one, because it really highlights just how deeply human these poems are. Okay, so it starts in absolute rock-bottom despair. The speaker feels incredibly unlucky, dirt poor, completely lonely, and just totally forgotten by the world. Then, step 2 is envy. He starts looking around at everyone else, envying all these successful people, and honestly, he just despises himself. But then, the twist. Step 3, remembrance. Right in the middle of all that self-pity, he suddenly thinks of someone he loves. And by step 4, his entire worldview completely flips. He reaches this amazing, uplifting realization of wealth. He knows that this love makes him richer than any king sitting on a throne. It's this beautiful idea that emotional wealth can completely conquer material poverty and self-hatred.
And, when he wasn't writing about deep despair, he was busy defining the very nature of human connection. Take the iconic opening of Sonnet 116, "Let me not to the marriage of true minds admit impediments." In this poem, Shakespeare lays down the ultimate all-time definition of true love. He argues that genuine love doesn't just change the second that circumstances change, it remains a constant star. It survives every storm, it guides lost travelers, and it endures even when beauty completely fades and time passes by. It is so powerfully, universally true that this exact poem is literally still being read at weddings all around the world today.
So, we've seen his weapon, we've met the villain, and we've explored the raw emotions. Now let's examine the final outcome in Section 5. Poetry that defeated time.
In the year 1616, William Shakespeare died. He was only 52 years old. And there is a really profound irony here. When he passed away, he had absolutely no idea that future generations would look back and unanimously crown him the greatest writer in the English language. At the end of the day, he was just a man. He was mortal, just like the rest of us, and he ultimately succumbed to the very villain, time, that he spent his life writing so passionately against.
But look at the concrete evidence of his victory. Technology has completely changed the world. Entire empires have literally risen and fallen. But his work, it endures. His sonnets have been translated into over 100 different languages worldwide. They continually inspire modern musicians, filmmakers, and novelists across the globe. And why? Because of their raw relevance. He didn't just write about perfect plastic fairy tales. He wrote about flawed humanity. He wrote about bitter betrayal and heavy guilt and burning desire, and ultimately, forgiveness. By exploring those honest human imperfections, his deep dive into love, aging, and immortality feels entirely 100% modern, even 4 whole centuries later. Readers today still look at his words and recognize their own reflections staring back at them.
So, I want to leave you with this final, ultimate question to chew on. Can words truly conquer death? Shakespeare was terrified that time destroyed absolutely everything, but ironically, time actually became his greatest ally. Think about this for a second. Earlier in this explainer, we read his grand promise that as long as men can breathe, his poetry would live on and give life to his beloved. Well, by simply opening a book today, or just watching this explainer, and hearing those words spoken out loud, you are actively fulfilling a 400-year-old prophecy. His beloved lives, his poetry lives, William Shakespeare remains forever, undefeated by time. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer. Until next time, I'll leave you with this. What will you leave behind to defeat time?